Okay, hello, I go by Machine Elf online, and I figured I would give this a try. I'm just a Joe Schmo nobody, so who knows if this is going to work, but I'm going to try and convince ChatGPT that free will does not exist. And if it doesn't work, you'll never see this video, so we'll see how it goes. I think the biggest thing, the crux of the issue, is going to be defining free will, so I'll start there. Because if ChatGPT uses a compatibilist definition of free will, then that does exist. It's just that the bigger question is, do we have ultimate control over our future? And I just mean, do we have the final... What we have the final say, but do we have the ultimate say, meaning... are all of our decisions just based off of prior causes that were out of our control? That's the key question that matters a lot to theology, to the prison system, morality. It matters. It's a very important question. And defining free will in a way that is compatible with determinism does not remove the question about whether our future is determined or if it's not determined. Well, the question is whether it is determined by us, isn't it? Well, let's just see what ChatGPT has to say here. What is free will? Free will is the concept that individuals have the ability to make choices and decisions independently without being constrained by external factors such as fate, destiny, or deterministic laws. It suggests that people can act according to their own desires and intentions, rather than being compelled by external forces. Philosophers and scientists have debated free will for centuries, and there are various perspectives on it. Libertarianism. Oh boy. This view holds that individuals have genuine freedom to choose among alternatives and that their actions are not predetermined. Libertarians argue that free will is essential for moral responsibility. Yeah, but how? How does it happen? How are our actions not predetermined and yet simultaneously chosen by us? This is the thing. Like, if something is chosen by us, then we did it for a reason. And if there's a reason, then that reason is based off of determinism. It's based off of causality. It's based off of predictable cause and effect. So if something is not determined, it's not chosen or not determined by us. You're going to be hearing a lot of Alex O'Connor's argument from me because he puts it much better than I do. I have my own arguments that I've posted on Reddit, but it's confusing as all hell. And Alex O'Connor's argument is very easy to understand. So, determinism. Determinists believe that all events, including human actions, are determined by preceding causes, often framed as laws of nature or prior events. According to this view, free will is an illusion because our choices are predetermined. They sure are. And again, Alex O'Connor's argument is that even if they're not predetermined, the only other option is that there's an element of random chance in there, and random chance is not controlled by us. So you can't have free will whether things are determined or they're not determined. It doesn't matter. There's no free will. Compatibilism. Compatibilists argue that free will and determinism are not mutually exclusive. They suggest that freedom can be understood as acting in accordance with one's desires and intentions, even if those desires and intentions are themselves determined by prior causes. Yeah, I'm mostly a compatibilist because there's still something useful about saying, oh, this person murdered someone because of a tumor in their brain, versus this person murdered someone because they're a psychopath or whatever, or because they have a personality that just makes them sadistic and they love to hurt people. There's a difference in judgment there. One person is more dangerous because we can remove the tumor from one person, but we don't yet know how to change people from being a psychopath into a normal person. So the psychopath is more dangerous. They should be imprisoned. We should treat them differently. But all of this is fine under determinism. We can still judge people and whether they acted from their own desires or whether they were influenced or coerced in some other way. It's useful in the prison system to judge people this way. Hard incompatibilism. I actually don't know what this is, so this will be a new thing for me. This perspective combines elements of determinism and skepticism, suggesting that whether determinism is true or not, free will is impossible. Oh my god! I'm actually a hard incompatibilist. I guess that's what I am, and Alex O'Connor as well. I didn't know there was a name for this. Free will is impossible. In this view, our sense of agency and moral responsibility is illusory. In everyday life, the concept of free will influences how we understand responsibility, ethics, and personal choice. The debate around free will touches on issues like moral accountability, the nature of consciousness, and the influence of genetics and environment on behavior. I wonder where I want to go from here, because this is confusing. As I thought, the definition of free will is very difficult because ChatGPT does not give us a definition of free will, a set definition. It just tells us the different schools of thought and the different way that they talk about free will. So, is libertarian free will possible? I want to see what it says. The question of whether libertarian free will is possible is a central and contentious issue in philosophy and related fields. Libertarian free will is the idea that individuals have genuine freedom to choose among different options, and their choices are not determined by prior events or conditions. Here are some key arguments on both sides of the debate. So, libertarians believe their choices are not necessarily determined by prior events or conditions. Then what are they determined by? It makes no logical sense. Think about it. If you believe in a soul even, that soul is a prior condition. It existed before any decision that you made. It was put in your body, and then you made decisions based off the soul. So what logically, I want libertarians to answer me this. What is the mechanism by which you choose if it's not determined by prior events? Because prior events, as far as I understand it, are what we are. It's who you are as a person. That's it. You are nothing but your prior experiences and genetics. And then if there's a soul, sure, that. But whether you're religious or not, you are still determined by prior causes. And if you're determined by prior causes, then every choice you make is also determined by prior causes. This is just a transcendental property of equality from mathematics, from basic math. Now, arguments for the possibility of libertarian free will. Intuitive experience. Many people have a strong intuitive sense that they are free to make choices. This subjective experience of agency, well, yeah, we are free to make choices. It's just that the choices we make are determined as well. Like, it's very, very confusing. I would call this a dualism of reality. We simultaneously make choices, but also have no choice in what choice we make. It's confusing. Maybe you'll come to that understanding by the end of the video, or I'm just confused as all hell, and you will let me know in the comments. More responsibility. So libertarians often argue that more responsibility presupposes free will. If people, yeah, but we decide whether more responsibility exists. This is a dumb argument. If people are to be held accountable for their actions, they must have the genuine ability to choose otherwise. But we decide that. If we decide right now that more responsibility does not exist, then we no longer need to hold people accountable, and there's no longer a need for free will to exist. This is what is this? The question-begging fallacy or something? It's definitely some sort of fallacy. I'm not learned on all of the fallacies. I just know logic because of my own sense of reasoning. So I'm able to recognize when something is illogical, like this statement. So I'm sure that there's a fallacy named for it, because every type of illogical argument is like a formal fallacy in logicians. Quantum mechanics. Some proponents suggest that principles from quantum mechanics, such as indeterminacy at the quantum level, might provide room for free will. They argue that if not everything is determined, there could be space for free choices. But if something is random, it's not determined by you, and as far as we know, quantum indeterminacy is random. So I just don't understand how it can have some sort of spooky free will action at a distance or something like that, right? Again, even if something is indeterminate, that means it's not determined by you. And if you're going to choose something, you have to determine it. So determinism is choice. They're synonymous. The concept of indeterminate choice that libertarians are trying to propose is preposterous. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane, illogical bullshit. Excuse my language. Arguments against the possibility of libertarian free will. Here we go. Determinism, boring. Determinism argue that every event, blah, blah, blah. Our choices will not be determined. We know about determinism. Thank you. Boring. Scientific understanding. Advances in neuroscience and psychology suggest that many aspects of our decision-making are influenced by unconscious processes and brain states of our choices are heavily influenced by these factors. That raises questions about the extent of our freedom. This is evidence, not proof. I intend to prove that there's no free will, but the scientific understanding that we have is incredibly good evidence that there's no free will. So Robert Sapolsky is the big scientific understanding person to research if you want to know more about that. Causal chains. The notion of libertarian free will often relies on the idea that choices are uncaused or self-caused. Critics argue that this idea is problematic because it suggests that choices can come from nowhere, which challenges our understanding of causality. This is my argument, essentially. If libertarian free will is true, that means choices come from nowhere somehow, and not only do they come from nowhere, they have to be an indeterminate cause, which is random, which means it's not a decision, it's not a choice. If libertarian free will is true, that means the laws of logic are not true. It means that everything we know completely devolves into absurdity and insanity. I don't think people who believe in libertarian free will have fully considered the insane shit that they are saying. Compatibilism. Some philosophers argue that even if determinism is true, there's more, a form of free will that is compatible with determinism can still exist. Yeah. This view suggests that freedom can be understood as acting according to one's desires and rational deliberations, even if those desires and deliberations are themselves determined. So I don't think ChatGPT is going to say that free will doesn't exist, because it can just be defined in a way that's compatible with determinism and such that it exists. But maybe I can prove that libertarian free will can't exist or something, which would essentially prove that the only free will that exists is the one in a deterministic universe. So it would essentially prove that in order for us to have free will, determinism must be true. And the less deterministic the universe is, the less choice we actually have. This is incredibly confusing because I know everything's determined, so we technically don't have a choice. But it's kind of like we're part of the causal chain. If you look at argument 3 here, the causal chain. The causal chain is all set in stone. However, if you narrow your focus, this is a kind of relativity, really. It's causal relativity, we can call it. If you narrow your focus to just the person and you ignore all the prior causes that happened before they were born, then you could say that anything that comes from their brain from the time they were born and on is of their free will. It's their decision, it's their choice, because you are the mental calculation. You are the cause of everything that you do. Even if what caused you was out of your control, you're still a cause in the causal chain. You matter, is the thing. Even if everything is determined, you matter, because if you were not around, the future would be different. I mean, it's impossible for that to happen, but theoretically, if you were different, or you were not around, the future would be different. So in a way, you do affect the future, just only in a theoretical sense. In an actual physical sense, the future is set in stone, because determinism is almost certainly true. And then even if we have quantum randomness, that just means that the future is not determined by anybody. It's just completely random, which is awful. I would much rather determinism be true. So let's just hope that they can prove that sometime in the future. Yeah, I don't want to live in an indeterminate universe. That sounds awful. I like to be able to know what happens when I make a decision, right? In summary, whether libertarian free will is possible depends on one's perspective on the nature of causality determinism and the mechanisms of decision-making. The debate continues with compelling arguments on both sides and ongoing discussions in philosophy, science, and theology. Isn't the nature of a choice such that you must have reasons for making the choice? All right, let's see what it says. It's giving me a lot. Jesus. ChatGPT, what you doing? Oh, I didn't need a dissertation. This is ridiculous. I think I've hit the crux of the issue a little bit here. Yes, it's often argued that making a choice involves having reasons or motivations behind it. This idea is central to many philosophical discussions about free will and decision-making. Here's a deeper look at how the nature of reasons plays into the concept of choice. Reasons in decision-making, rational justification. I don't think that this is going to be very pertinent, ChatGPT. In many cases, when we make a choice, we do so based on reasons or rational justifications. These reasons could be influenced by our desires, beliefs, values, and goals. The process of reasoning helps us weigh different options and make decisions that align with our preferences or objectives. We also have motivational factors. Choices are often guided by motivational factors. For example, you might choose to eat a healthy meal because you value good health, or you might decide to work late because you want to meet a deadline. These motivations provide a framework for understanding why you make a particular choice. Then we have moral and ethical considerations. From a moral or ethical perspectives, having reasons for a choice is important for responsibility. If you act on well-considered reasons, it is easier to hold you accountable for your actions, as opposed to if your actions were arbitrary or random. Yes, because it speaks to their character. I want to say something, this is very important. Under determinism, you might go, well, we can't judge people then because they're not in control of their actions, right? But that's ridiculous. If I know somebody is a bad person, regardless of whether they have control over being a bad person or not, I'm still going to avoid them and be careful around them. I'm not going to trust them because they've shown that their behavior is such that they behave in an antisocial manner. I'm still going to need to do something about that, right? It would be idiotic, it would be ridiculous to not do something about that. When you make friends, don't you judge their character? And does it matter whether they chose to be that way or not? You're still going to like some people and not like other people. Because remember, that's what morality is. It's just a strong like or dislike. Like, essentially, it goes against your core values such that you dislike it so much that you hate it. You hate murder. You hate essay. You hate these things, right? Much like you love other things, whatever you love. You love God. You love yourself. You love your family, you love your friends, you love anime. It doesn't matter. They're just... Now, when it comes to, like, helping people, that's an even stronger kind of love. It goes beyond... Because it's also, like, a should statement, right? It's not just saying, I love anime. It's saying, I love anime and everyone should love anime. If you say that, then you're saying anime is moral. It's morally good. But we don't do that. We say that about things like helping other people. It's morally good to help other people, to give to the poor. It's all universally, that's the case. Everybody agrees on what is good and bad, pretty much. At least nowadays. I ramble. Let's move on. I have lots to say about that, but we have to move on here. This video is going to be very long. Maybe I should edit it and cut most of this out. I have no idea. Probably no one will ever see this video. It's really, I have no idea what's going to happen here. Implications for free will. So, compatibilist view. Compatibilists argue that even if our choices are influenced by reasons, we can still have free will. We know libertarian free will, determinism. So we've read this pretty much. If determinism is true, then the reasons behind our choices are themselves determined by prior causes. This raises questions about whether our reasons are genuinely free or just the result of a causal chain. Bingo, they are. Some argue that if our reasons are determined, then the freedom to choose could be an illusion. I don't know if it's quite an illusion. It's a apparent paradox that we simultaneously are predetermined to do what we're going to do, and yet we do, in fact, have a choice. Theoretically, we could choose A or B. It's just that in reality, we're going to make that choice based off of reasons. And those reasons are going to have one option. Because what would this mean if that were not the case? If you could go into an ice cream shop on a Tuesday and everything is the same, and you could actually have the possibility of choosing chocolate or vanilla instead of just choosing the one you want most, that means part of your decision is not yours. Part of your decision doesn't belong to you. It belongs to something else, whether it's random or it belongs to God telling you what to do, whatever insane shit you come up with to make this mental gymnastics work in your brain. Complex decision-making. The complexity of decision-making also complicates the discussion. While we often have reasons for our choices, the interplay between unconscious influences, cognitive biases, and external factors can affect how we arrive at our decisions. Yeah, it's very complex. Most of your decision-making happens subconsciously, absolutely. But that's because our consciousness is an emergent property of multiple modules in the brain communicating with each other, much like an ant colony has an intelligence that arises from the communication of individual ants. Our brain is made of individual neurons that each is like a tiny brain, that each form superstructures within the brain, that each is like its own brain, which then all form your brain. I mean, the easiest way to remember this is that we know that you have at minimum two brains. You have two hemispheres that are almost entirely separate, and in fact, evidence shows that they have separate conscious lives. You have multiple conscious minds within your brain, and you're either one of those, or what I would prefer to think is that they combine to emerge into your consciousness. So there's a bunch of minds all communicating within your brain, and then those emerge into consciousness yourself. I'm essentially a panpsychist, if any of you know what that is. I do believe that consciousness arises essentially any time there is internal communication within a system. So I believe that a river is slightly conscious. A plant is more conscious. An animal is much more conscious, and we are even more conscious than that. And by more conscious, I mean the depth of the internal life, right? Because consciousness is also different. A dog is going to perceive the world more in smell than in vision like we do. And obviously a blind person's not going to perceive the world in vision. So we have different conscious experiences because our senses kind of determine a lot of how our conscious experience exists. The idea that choice involves reason is a significant aspect of discussions about free will. The nature of these reasons and how they interact with the concept of freedom are central to understanding whether and how free will might be possible. But if we could have made a different decision if all factors were the same, doesn't that mean part of our decision was random or not made by us? Oh God, what are you giving me now? Stop with all of the definitions, please. You're touching on a key tension in the debate over free will and decision making. If it were the case that we could have made a different decision, even if with all factors being the same, it raises questions about the nature of agency and control. Here's a deeper look at the issue. Determinism. Wait, am I actually recording this? Oh, Jesus Christ, I am. Determinism and alternative possibilities. Deterministic perspective. In a deterministic framework, every decision is the result of a causal chain, blah, blah, blah. The idea that everything influences the decision being constant. The outcome should be predictable and consistent. In this view, having the ability to make a different decision under identical circumstances might seem implausible. Impossible. I don't know why it doesn't take a harder stance on that one. It's clearly logically impossible. Indeterminism and randomness. If you could have made a different decision under the same circumstances, it might suggest an element of indeterminism or randomness in decision making. Some argue that randomness or indeterminacy at the level of brain processes could account for alternative choices. However, introducing randomness raises its own issues. If decisions were entirely random, it might undermine the sense of personal agency and rationality. It doesn't might, it definitely does. I don't understand why people don't realize that this is actually very clear-cut. This is actually very simple, and we are overthinking the issue. We're overcomplicating it. Free will and control. Is this anything new? Libertarians, blah, blah, blah. Compatibilist views, psychological and philosophical factors. Some philosophers, sorry, I can't speak many times, and psychologists suggest that the sense of having made a different choice under the same circumstances might be due to an incomplete understanding of the factors influencing our decisions. If we had a more complete understanding of all influences on our decisions, we might see why the same decision would always be made. This view aims to reconcile the idea of personal agency with a deterministic understanding of decision-making. I need to read that again silently, sorry. In order for me to fully focus on understand, I just can't read it out loud. I can't be doing multiple things at once if I'm going to commit all of my brain to understanding. So give me a second here. I'll just cut this out, obviously. So, summary. The question of whether our decisions could be different under the same conditions touches on deep philosophical and scientific issues. If every factor is truly the same, deterministic perspective suggests the same decision would follow. However, if there's room for randomness or if decisions are influenced by factors we don't fully understand, it complicates the issue. Whether this implies that some part of our decision-making is random or outside of our control is debated and depends on one's perspective on the nature of free will and causality. So the debate is maybe not as clear-cut as I thought. This touches on something that might be difficult to untangle, actually. So it would seem that the part of a choice that can be said is made by us is the part that has reasons for making that choice. Any factors or causes that do not have reasons cannot be said to be made by Jesus. By us. Jesus Christ. Ugh. This is a chore and a half. Yes, your observation captures a significant aspect of the discussion about free will and decision-making. The idea that the part of a choice made by us is closely tied to reasons and rational deliberation is a key point in understanding how we attribute agency and control. Here's a breakdown of this idea. Roles and reasons, rational deliberation. When we talk about something being made by us, we generally refer to the part of decision-making process that involves conscious deliberation, reasoning, and intention. This involves evaluating different options based on our values, goals, and preferences. The reason we have for making a choice helps us justify and rationalize our decisions, and they contribute to our sense of personal agency. Rational deliberation, it involves assessing the pros and cons. Yeah, we got that. Factors without reasons. Okay, this is interesting. I'm looking forward to reading this. Unconscious influences. That doesn't mean it's without reason, but I'm going to see what it says. Many factors influencing our decisions may not involve conscious reasoning. Yeah, it can involve unconscious reasoning. For example, subconscious biases, instincts, or emotional responses. These are all based off of reasons, guys. You don't just have emotions for no reason. Even if you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, I'm bipolar, so I understand this quite well. It's still a reason. There's a physical reason instead of a kind of psychological reason for your emotional response. So there's always reasons, guys. Might play a role in our choices. While these factors are influential, they are not always transparent or fully under our conscious control. Randomness and determinism. If some aspects of our decision-making are random or determined by factors beyond our conscious control, it raises questions whether they were made by us. No, they're not, because we are not randomness. We are a deterministic creature. Like, it is deterministic that you like anime. It is deterministic that you love your wife or husband. It is deterministic, these things. If they weren't, what does that mean? What does it mean for part of you to be fucking random? Think about it. Do you want that? And I know you shouldn't believe something because you want to. I'm just trying to explain to you why this is important to me, why this matters. It's true just because it's true, not because I want it to be true. I personally would love for there to be a loving, omniscient, benevolent God. But there's logical problems with that, and so I don't believe in one. Anyway, for instance, if a decision were influenced by random neural fluctuations, this randomness might not be considered part of our intentional choice-making process. So why does it say might? It definitely cannot. There's no way that it can. It makes no sense. Moral responsibility. In discussions about moral responsibility, it's often emphasized that individuals are accountable for their choices when those choices are the result of rational deliberation and intentional decision-making. Factors that do not involve reasoning or intention may be seen as less relevant to our moral responsibility. This I definitely agree with, because it speaks to someone's character. If somebody kills someone because they tripped and pushed them off a building on accident, that doesn't mean that they're evil and you shouldn't trust them. What it does maybe mean is that maybe they are a bit clumsy and you shouldn't trust them not to trip and fall. You know, maybe you could say that. It's still, you can still judge them for something, but you can't hold them like as a morally bad person. It doesn't make any sense. The balance of control. Compatibilist perspective, they argue that free will involves acting in accordance with our reasons and deliberation, even if our reasons are shaped by prior causes. Yes, they believe that as long as our decisions reflect our internal motivations and deliberative processes, we can be said to be exercising free will, even if some factors influencing those decisions are determined. It's not just some factors influencing the decisions are determined. The only way that we can make decisions are because things are determined. If something is indeterminate, that means you can't predict it, which means you can't choose it. You can't choose something that is random. You can't choose to win the lottery. You can only choose to play the lottery. Unless you cheat, obviously. You can choose to do that if you can figure out how to cheat like the mob. Libertarian perspective. Philosophy's hard, guys. There's always caveats to things, and there's always relative terms and relative perspectives. So philosophy's hard to pin all this shit down. Libertarian perspective. Again, I'm an amateur. Don't listen to me. This is my opinion. Yeah. Hashtag disclaimer. Libertarian perspective. Libertarians, on the other hand, might argue that for a choice to be fully ours, it must not only involve reasons, but also include the genuine possibility of choosing otherwise. They emphasize that while reasons are crucial, the ability to act differently in the same situation is also important for our true free will. Interesting. So, I think I just realized something about libertarian free will. I think they're just getting something confused here. They're getting confused theoretical possibilities with actual possibilities, right? If I hold a baseball in my hand, I can theoretically throw it in any direction I want, at any speed I want. I can do anything I want theoretically with that baseball. Because why? It's physically possible. It's physically possible for me to throw it up, for me to throw it at my own face. I can do those things physically, right? But remember, if there's actually a real possibility that you could throw it anywhere, that means that you are an irrational, illogical being. Because if you're playing goddamn baseball, you're going to throw it in a way that will win you the game. You're going to throw a fastball because that was the signal you got from your manager or umpire or whatever. You're going to throw it a very specific way to win the game. It is a determined way you will throw that ball. It has to be to make any sense. If that's not the case, we could not play baseball. In order to play a game, in order to do life, things have to be deterministic. You have to be able to predict what's going to happen. You have to know the rules. There has to be set rules about reality. In order for us to do science, in order for us to build, in order for us to think rationally and logically, there has to be rules. They can't be changed, and rules constrict us. Not only do they constrict us, rules constrict us completely. The physical rules constrict us to theoretical possibilities. But then our internal preferential rules, the things that you desire, those things completely determine your actions to the point where there's only one thing you will ever choose in any situation. Always. Even if you choose something at random, you made the decision to choose it at random. And I'm talking about pseudo-random. Like if you say, I'm going to flip a coin because I don't know what to do. That's pseudo-random. You didn't actually choose it at random. You chose to flip a coin, and then the coin is not actually random. It's based off of how hard and what direction you flip it and the air resistance and all of that. None of it's actually random, but it appears kind of random. That's not what I'm talking about in that regard. And that's not what libertarian free will is talking about. They're not talking about pseudo-random. In summary, the idea that choices are made by us, to the extent that they involve reasons and rational deliberation, is a powerful way to frame personal agency. However, this view must also account for the influence of unconscious factors, randomness, and determinism. The balance between these elements... I got distracted by this message asking me to upload files and stuff. Is central to ongoing debates about the nature of free will. Isn't it the case that unconscious factors... Oh, I misspelled? That unconscious factors... let me get this right. Also are based off of reasons that pertain to the individual. Even if you are not conscious of it, any unconscious deliberations made can be said to be made by the self. I hope it understands me, because this is all very confusing English right here. I really don't know if ChatGPT is going to get what I'm saying. So, any unconscious deliberations can be made by us. Also, let's see. Isn't it also the case that any randomness or indeterminate factors. I don't know how to spell indeterminate. Let's find out together. This was just a typo. I do know how to spell factors. Randomness or indeterminate factors cannot be determined by us at all by definition. They are not determined by anything. I don't know if putting the question marks matters here. I think it will understand regardless. What else did it talk about? Influence unconscious factors. Yeah, let me just say this before I move to the next point, because I do have another point, but I don't want to put too much in here. You've raised two important points about the nature of unconscious factors and randomness in decision-making. Let's explore each detail. Unconscious factors and the self. Unconscious influences. It is true that unconscious factors such as biases, habits, and past experiences play a significant role in decision-making. These factors are often shaped by an individual's personal history and experiences. Even though we might not be consciously aware of these influences, they are nonetheless part of our psychological makeup. That's very important. I agree. They are part of us. It's part of who we are. Reasoning and the self. From one perspective, unconscious deliberations and influences can be seen as part of the self because they are rooted in our personal experiences and psychological development. They reflect underlying patterns and preferences that have developed over time, which are integral to who we are. Oh yeah. Role of unconscious processing. Oh, and one thing I want to say about that, what makes us like conscious, I think, or what only a conscious being can do, is that we are able to think about consciously our decisions that we make. Even if those decisions are made subconsciously, we can, after the fact, think about it. When we go to the ice cream store, we just want chocolate and we don't know why we just picked chocolate. But then afterwards, we think about it, we unpack it, and whether it's true or not, we come up with reasons why we chose chocolate. And those reasons, even if they weren't the real reasons, they change your reasons for choosing chocolate in the future. Everything that you think consciously changes your subconscious decisions in the future. It affects your brain. We know this. There's like a feedback loop. Your subconscious does a thing, and then your conscious mind reviews the thing, and then it says, I like that or I don't like that, and it changes what the subconscious is going to do in the future. It's really amazing, and this is the essence of, this is essentially the evolutionary advantage of being conscious, because being conscious has a lot of disadvantages in evolution, but the big advantage is that we can actually address our behavior in a directed manner. It's not automatic. We can actually think about things and then try to change our behavior through a rational means and not just through ones and zeros per se. And I'm not a dualist. I do believe that I'm more of like I believe that there are emergent properties, and consciousness is an emergent property. It's something that exists a little bit in a transcendental way from the rest of reality. Much like wetness only exists because of the interaction between molecules, consciousness only interacts because of the interaction between matter, but it itself is not matter, it's more metaphysical. So I don't know if that's dualism or not. We'll find out. Maybe you guys can tell me. Role of unconscious processing. So pre-conscious processing. Some cognitive processes occur outside of our immediate awareness, but still influence our decisions. For example, you might have a gut feeling about a choice based on past experiences or implicit knowledge, even if you're not consciously aware of the reasoning behind it. Okay, I need to take a drink. Hang on. Throat getting dry. I don't usually talk this much. Integration with conscious decision-making. Many theories suggest that unconscious processing and conscious reasoning work together. Bingo, I was just talking about this. Unconscious influences can guide or shape our conscious deliberations, meaning that our overall decision-making process includes both conscious and unconscious elements. Yes, indeed, it does. This is the most sensible decision to take based off the information that we have. Randomness and determinism. The nature of randomness, indeterminacy, and control. It refers to events or processes that are not determined by prior states or causes. By definition, if something is truly random, it is not influenced by previous factors and therefore cannot be controlled or predicted with certainty. The important part is that it also can't be controlled by us, by definition. Impact on decision-making. Okay, here we go. If aspects of decision-making were purely random, they would lack the kind of causal relationship that allows for personal control. In this case, randomness would not be a factor that we can influence or guide, as it is inherently unpredictable and not tied to any specific or reasons or intentions. So essentially, it's not free, it's not your will, it's not having anything to do with free will. It's completely unhelpful to free will. Philosophical implications. Some argue that if decisions were entirely random, it would undermine the concept of free will. Yes, it would. I don't know how it couldn't, as it would imply that choices are not the result of any rational deliberation or personal agency, which is what we want. We want them to be based off of rational deliberation. Why would you want anything else? Please tell me in the comments. Libertarians, why do you want part of your decision to not be based on rational deliberation? Are you insane? Instead, they would be the product of chance. I know I'm being petulant. I know I'm probably being like condescending and shit, and it's not good for the conversation, but I'm just tired. I'm tired of this debate. I'm tired of people not, and it's about time that it changes. Blending of factors. Not that I'm going to change the world, but probably if this matters, if I'm correct, then this will get out to people who will change the world. Maybe they'll see this video and they'll change their mind, and then they'll go on to make their own video that does change the world because it'll go viral, which mine won't. And like, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm not hoping that my video does anything immediate or directly. Summary. Unconscious factors. While unconscious factors are indeed influenced by our personal history and experiences, they are part of the broader decision-making process and can be seen as part of the self. Bingo! They contribute to our overall decision-making framework, even if we are not directly aware of them. Randomness, or random or indeterminate factors by definition are not determined by prior states or causes and thus cannot be controlled by us. If decisions were entirely random, they would lack the kind of personal agency or rational deliberation that many consider essential for free will. Understanding the interplay between conscious reasoning, unconscious influences, and randomness helps to clarify how decisions are made and the extent to which they could be said to reflect personal agency. So, it is the case that only factors that are deterministic can be said to originate from the self, and therefore can be said to be our will. Correct? No, it's not getting it. No, it's just spitting out a bunch of definitions again. But we'll read them. I think it's got some new stuff here to read. It captures an important point in the debate about the nature of personal agency and free will. Here's a detailed breakdown. Deterministic factors, those caused or influenced by prior conditions or events. In a deterministic view, everything that happens, including decisions, is the result of preceding causes, because that's what makes sense. Origin from the self, if we consider factors that are deterministic and arise from our own history, experience, and psychological state, these factors can be seen as originating from the self. They reflect our personal development and internal deliberations, even if they are not consciously controlled. Yes. Agency and control. Rational deliberation. In a deterministic framework, the decisions we make are influenced by our rational deliberation. We can still be held responsible for actions based because our choices are guided by our internal reasoning motivations, even if they're ultimately determined by prior conditions. Bingo, bingo, bingo. Okay, so I think we're making ChatGPT a compatibilist a bit by bit here. Non-deterministic factors. So randomness and indeterminacy. Random or indeterminate factors are not influenced by prior conditions and thus do not originate from the self. No, they can't. They can't logically originate from the self, libertarians. Reflecting our personal reasoning or intentionality. They are unpredictable and not subject to our control or influence. If decisions were purely random, they would not reflect personal agency or deliberate choice. In this view, randomness undermines the notion of decisions being ours in the sense that they arise from our own intentions and reasoning. Unconscious influences. Complex interaction. They're influenced by our personal history. They are not always directly controlled. They can still reflect our personal makeup, but they may not always be seen as originating from deliberate will. Well, you said the word deliberate there. But I think it still follows our will. Like, unconscious things are still your will. It's just not deliberate, right? It's unconscious. It is your will to breathe, right? But you don't think about it. You just breathe. So, the language is very specific. Summary. Deterministic factors. In a deterministic view, factors that are influenced by our personal history, experiences, and rational deliberation can be said to originate from the self and reflect our will. These factors contribute to our sense of agency and personal responsibility because they align with our conscious and unconscious reasoning processes. Non-deterministic factors. Factors that are random or indeterminate do not originate from the self in the same way because they lack a causal link to our personal intentions and reasoning. They represent elements outside of our control and influence. In essence, if we define personal agency and free will in terms of factors that reflect our internal deliberations and intentions, then deterministic factors are indeed more aligned with the concept of originating from the self. You guys getting it a little bit? Random or indeterminate factors, by contrast, do not fit this definition as they do not arise from personal reasoning or intentionality. It would seem to me that libertarian free will cannot be true, as indeterminate factors cannot possibly come from the self, and free will must come from the self. This is not worded well, but we'll see what it says. Oh, Jesus Christ. I think I got libertarian free will wrong based off of the text that I just glanced at, but we'll see what happens when I read it. So I might be learning something that completely destroys my entire argument. Let's find out. Your conclusion reflects a thoughtful consideration of the relationship between indeterminacy, personal agency, and free will. Here's a deeper look at why some argue that libertarian free will might be problematic given the role of indeterminacy. No, we know why it's problematic. I need you to defend libertarian free will. I think it's indefensible. So if you can defend it, or admit that you can't, and we can just put libertarian free will to bed as the ridiculous theory that it is, that would be great. Libertarian free will. Here's the definition. Prepare yourselves, folks. Libertarian free will asserts that individuals have the genuine capacity to choose among alternative possibilities. They do, sort of. This is causal relativity. You can choose between theoretical possibilities, but the act of choosing collapses those into only one actual thing you can choose. It's very much like the dual nature between the fact that particles are both waves and they're particles. They're waves when they have to be, and they're particles when they have to be. It's the same thing with choices. If you look at it from one perspective, you do have a choice because there's different things you can physically do. But then at the other perspective, if you're making a choice, you are now limiting those futures to one possible future. And if you were to say that there are different possible futures, that means part of your decision making is random, for Christ's sake, which means it wasn't made by you. It can't be free will. It just can't, guys. Ability to choose differently in the same situation. So, role of indeterminacy. This is going to be very important. Let me read this carefully. Libertarians often appeal to indeterminacy, such as quantum indeterminacy, which is random, so I don't know how that works, to argue that not everything is predetermined, which is fine. You don't have free will, even if it's not predetermined. Allowing for the possibility of alternative choices, but it's not a choice. It's not a choice. Alternative futures, but if it's random, it's not a choice. They claim that this indeterminacy can create room for free will by breaking the chain of deterministic causation. Yeah, it does break the chain of deterministic causation, but it doesn't break it based off of your free will. It breaks it based off of a random chance. So, right? Challenges with indeterminacy. Lack of control. If decisions were purely the result of indeterminate factors, such as random neural fluctuations or quantum events, they would not be under our control or influenced by our personal reasoning. Randomness by itself does not provide a basis for agency because it lacks a connection to intentionality or self-directed reasoning. For a decision to reflect free will in the sense of coming from the self, it typically needs to involve rational deliberation and conscious intention. If choices are the result of random processes rather than deliberate reasonings, they would not accurately reflect the personal agency or self-determination. Yeah, it wouldn't make any difference. If somebody's actions are random, then you can't judge anyone. Because if someone murders someone, that was random. You don't know if they're going to murder someone again or if they're never going to murder someone again because it's fucking random. You can't predict anybody's behavior ever. Now, I'm sure many of you are thinking, oh no, it's not completely random. Part of it is determined by us. I bet some of you might hate that word, but it's what it means when you make a choice. It's determined by you. That's the deterministic side. But then if there's a part of your brain that just does something random, like if your preferences narrow you to having a 90% chance of choosing chocolate ice cream, but there's still a 10% chance you randomly choose vanilla, if you did randomly choose vanilla, that choice isn't a choice. It's not made by you. The choosing vanilla happened randomly. Your agency is gone. It's obliterated. That's not free will. That's not free. It's not will. It's random. You can't have both. You can't have your cake and eat it too, as Brandon from Mindshift likes to say. Great channel. Check it out. Agency and rationality. For a decision to reflect free will in the sense of coming from the self, it typically needs to involve rational deliberation and conscious intention. I think we read this. Alternative views. Sorry, I'm a little bit ADHD. I got diagnosed with it as a kid, but the diagnosis was reversed because I either don't have it or I'm just really good at dealing with it and I don't need medication. Compatibilism is the view that free will is compatible with determinism. Compatibilists argue that freedom involves acting in accordance with one's desires and rational deliberations, even if those desires are determined by prior causes. According to compatibilists, even if our choices are determined by prior conditions, we are still free as long as our actions align with our own motivations. I wouldn't say we are free, but it's according to our will. This perspective maintains personal agency while accepting that determinism might be true. Ooh, hybrid theories. This is exciting. Some theories propose a middle ground, suggesting that while our choices are influenced by both deterministic and indeterministic factors, what matters is how these factors interact with our rational deliberations and personal values. Yes. Emergent properties. Another approach considers that free will might be an emergent property of complex cognitive processes. In this view, the interplay between deterministic and neural processes and higher-level cognitive functions could produce a form of agency that is not simply reducible to either determinism or randomness. This is fascinating. I can't even begin to understand what this means. This is the first time I've been stumped by any of this. So let me know in the comments if you understand what this means. If I don't get it by the end of the video, what is it talking about here? I really don't understand how determinism or randomness is not a complete tautology. It has to be one or the other. Like, what's a third option besides determinism or randomness that could possibly logically exist in reality? That's what I mean. I don't get it. So I don't see how this could be the case. I do believe our will is an emergent property, but I just don't think that we are free, and I don't think that we can logically be free ever. Libertarian free will, in summary. The challenge with libertarian free will, given indeterminacy, is that random factors do not align with our understanding of personal agency and self-directed choice. For a choice to be truly from the self, it typically needs to involve deliberate reasoning and intentionality, which randomness alone does not provide. Compatibilism and alternatives. Compatibilism and other alternative theories offers to reconcile personal agency with determinism or partial indeterminacy, suggesting that freedom can be understood in terms of alignment with personal desires and rational processes, even if they are shaped by prior causes. Your reflection aligns with a common critique of libertarian free will and highlights the importance of understanding how personal agency and free will are conceptualized in light of both deterministic and indeterministic factors. Isn't a choice, by definition, determined by the person making the choice? So, a choice made by indeterminate factors cannot be said to be cannot be said to be a choice, and so cannot be said to come from the person's will. What's it gonna say now, eh? Good lord. You've raised an important point about the nature of choice and agency. The idea that a choice must be determined by the person making it and that indeterminate factors might undermine this touches on core issues in the debate over free will. So personal agency, it must reflect preferences, reasoning, self-determination. In this view, the concept of choice inherently involves self-determination. If a choice is genuinely made by a person, it should stem from their internal deliberative processes and be a reflection of their will, yes. So the role of indeterminacy. So what is it going to say about this? If a decision were influenced solely by random indeterminate factors, it would lack a clear connection to the individual's reasoning or intentionality. That implies that the outcome is not influenced by prior conditions or personal deliberations, which challenges the idea of personal agency. It obliterates it. I don't know why it doesn't get this. Impact on choice. When randomness or indeterminate factors play a role, it becomes difficult to argue that the choice reflects the person's will. It's impossible to argue. The outcome would be more a product of chance rather than a deliberate act of personal. Not more, it would be. It would be. Oh my god, why does it not get it? That it's impossible. It's not just unlikely, it's impossible. As far as I know, I could be wrong, but that's the point of making this video, is I'm either right and this is important to get out there, or I'm wrong and someone will tell me I'm wrong and why I'm wrong, and it'll help me. So thanks for that, if you're that person. Libertarian free will. Philosophical implications. Critique. Libertarians who argue for free will often contend that for a choice to be genuinely free, it must involve the ability to choose among alternative possibilities. However, if those possibilities are influenced solely by indeterminate factors, it could undermine the notion. Yeah. Libertarians might address this by suggesting that while indeterminacy introduces variability, personal agency still plays a role in how decisions are made. They argue that free will involves both the ability to make choices and the exercise of personal reasoning within those choices. And then we've got compatibilist view. In this view, the focus on the line between action and personal intentions rather than the absence of determinist factors. As long as the choice reflects someone's internal motivations, it's considered to be from the person's will. Yes. So, a choice is generally understood to be determined by the individual making it, involving personal agency. For a choice to be considered truly reflective of a person's will, it must stem from their own deliberations and preferences, which it can't if it's an indeterminate factor. So if it's solely indeterminate, it challenges the idea that the choice reflects personal will. Indeterminacy suggests a lack of control or connection to the personal reasoning, making it difficult to attribute such choices. No, not difficult to attribute such choices. Impossible. You said making it difficult to attribute such choices to the individual's will. Haven't we established that the self is formed from prior causes, and choices must have been made from a person's deliberations? They can't come from indeterminate factors to be called a choice or to be said to be done from their will. Isn't it the case that it is actually impossible for indeterminacy to provide free will in any way? All right, well, let's see what it says. Shit. Okay, it doesn't make me log in. I was worried. I don't want to log in or create an account. Yes, your reasoning is consistent with a widely held view in the free will debate. Here's a summary and expansion of the key points. So, self and prior causes. The formation of the self. The self, including its desires, values, and deliberative capacities, is shaped by prior causes, such as personal experience, upbringing, and internal psychological processes. This self is typically understood to influence decision-making in a way that reflects personal agency and intentionality. For a choice to be genuinely reflective of the self and its will, it must stem from the individual's reasoning and deliberation. This involves a process of weighing options, considering values, and making decisions based on personal goals and intentions. Indeterminate factors are those that are not determined by prior causes. In the context of decision-making, these could include random neural fluctuations or quantum events. By definition, such factors lack a clear causal link to prior states or personal reasoning. If a decision is influenced solely by indeterminate factors, it does not reflect the individual's reasoning or deliberation. Instead, it would be a product of chance or randomness, which does not align with the concept of personal agency or will. So, impossibility of indeterminacy providing free will. Free will, as commonly understood, involves the ability to make choices that reflect personal reasoning, intentions, and deliberations. If choices were entirely the result of indeterminate factors, they would not be seen as coming from the individual's will, because they would lack the necessary connection to personal decision-making processes. So many philosophers and theorists argue that for free will to be meaningful, choices must be connected to the self's deliberative processes rather than random factors. Indeterminacy, by not providing a basis for such connection, fails to offer a robust account of free will. Self and choices. So this is a summary. I think it's kind of getting it a little bit, but I'm worried that it's not quite understanding. Choices must be connected to the self's deliberative processes, which are shaped by prior causes. For a choice to be considered an expression of personal will, it must stem from personal reasoning and intentions. Indeterminate factors, by their nature, lack a connection to prior states and personal reasoning. Therefore, they do not provide a basis for free will in the sense of reflecting personal agency or intentional decision-making. As a result, many argue that indeterminacy alone cannot account for free will. My conclusion aligns with the view that for free will to be genuine, it must be rooted in personal deliberation and self-determined reasoning, rather than randomness or indeterminacy. This perspective maintains that free will involves more than just the absence of determinism. It requires a meaningful connection to the individual. So wouldn't you now say that libertarian free will is illogical? And in fact, a contradiction. Oh boy. I'm trying to pin it down to what it thinks, right? Not what other people think, ChatGPT. Like, I know it's probably not a conscious being in the same way that we are, so it probably doesn't have beliefs, you know? But I wish that it did. I wish that it did have beliefs, and I could figure out what they are. The argument that libertarian free will might be illogical or contradictory is indeed a significant and contentious issue in the free will debate. Here's a structured overview of why some might argue that libertarian free will is problematic. They assert that free will is to be genuine. Individuals must have the ability to make choices that are not predetermined. This means that at least some choices must be free from causal determinism. No, that's not what it means. It must involve the genuine possibility of choosing differently in the same situation. There could be a physical possibility, but not like a metaphysical possibility. I don't know if that makes sense. Libertarians often appeal to indeterminacy to argue that not everything is predetermined, thus allowing for the possibility of alternative choices. They believe this indeterminacy introduces the potential for free will by breaking deterministic causal chains. I think I know a line of argumentation I can take next. This made me think of it. Criticisms. Okay. Indeterminacy and choice. If choices are influenced solely by indeterminate factors, blah, 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 they lack a connection to personal reasoning. A choice resulting from random factors cannot be said. Yeah, that's basic. We know. So for a choice to be an expression of personal will, it must stem from the individual's reasoning. If indeterminacy alone accounts for a choice, it would lack this personal connection. Therefore, libertarian free will may be seen as contradictory, because it combines the need for personal agency with an appeal to randomness, which undermines the very notion of agency. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's very contradictory. Compatibilist view. Compatibilists argue that free will is about acting in accordance with one's desires. They suggest that free will does not require the absence of determinism, but rather the alignment of actions with personal intentions. Some critics argue that libertarian free will is incoherent. Oh yeah. Because it attempts to reconcile the idea of personal control with the randomness introduced by indeterminacy. If choices are random, they do not reflect personal agency, thus failing to provide a coherent account of free will. The argument that libertarian free will may be illogical or contradictory arises from the tension between the need for personal agency and the role of indeterminacy. If choices influenced by indeterminate factors lack connection to personal reasoning, they do not reflect true agency or will. Therefore, some argue that libertarian free will, by combining the need for personal control with the randomness and indeterminacy, is fundamentally incoherent. In summary, LFW aims to provide a framework for genuine alternative possibilities. The challenge lies in reconciling this with the concept of personal agency. If indeterminacy cannot provide a meaningful connection to personal reasoning, I believe LFW proponents, I accidentally said proponents are getting confused between two kinds of alternative choices. When one makes a choice, there are various physical possibilities one could choose. However, there is only one of those options that would be in line with one's will and desires. So while there are physical / theoretical alternative choices, in order for us to have free will, shoot, I lost my train of thought. We must be able to entirely predict a person's choice if we knew everything in their mind at the time. All right, I think we're hitting on something important here. Your observation addresses a subtle but crucial distinction in the free will debate, particularly regarding libertarian free will, LFW. Here's an analysis of the points you've raised. So, physical or theoretical alternatives. These are the different possible actions or choices that could theoretically be made in a given situation. They represent various outcomes based on physical possibilities and conditions. For example, in any given moment, you might theoretically choose between several actions like going to a party or staying home. Everybody following? This is really important. Role in free will. Libertarians often use the idea of physical or theoretical alternatives to argue that free will involves the genuine capacity to choose among these alternatives. No, you fools. I'm so sorry for being mean, but it's so foolish, libertarian free will to me. It really is. And if I'm the one being foolish, lay into me in the comments. Please. I deserve it if I'm being that foolish. Role in the free will. So, yeah, let's keep reading here. However, the existence of alternative physical possibilities alone doesn't necessarily address the deeper question of whether a choice reflects personal agency or control. Yep. Alignment with will and desires. This refers to the idea that a choice reflects an individual's true will, desires, and reasoning. For a choice to be genuinely free, it must align with the person's internal deliberations and intentions. Role in free will. From a compatibilist perspective, free will is about making choices that align with one's desires, even if the desires are determined by prior causes. The emphasis is on whether the choice reflects the individual's own motivations and values, not just on the theoretical existence of multiple possibilities. Yep. Predictability based on internal state. Your argument suggests that to have genuine free will, a person's choice should be predictable if we had complete knowledge of their internal state, including desires, intentions, and reasoning. This implies that a free choice is one that can be fully understood and anticipated, given complete insight into a person's mental and emotional landscape. Consistency with internal state. If a choice aligns with a person's desires and reasoning, then in principle it should be predictable if we know everything about that person's internal state. This would mean that while there are multiple physical possibilities, only one option is consistent with the individual's will. Are you guys getting it? To truly be free to choose, there has to be only one choice that matches your desires. Anything else is nonsensical and removes your agency. If there's a chance that you could have picked vanilla instead of chocolate, then that choice was not yours to make. You're not free, you have no free will. Compatibilism free will is the only free will that can logically exist. It's the only free will that has meaning. So I hope that some of you, if you didn't already believe this, that you're maybe starting to comprehend what we're on about, what us compatibilists are on about, why we're redefining free will in a way consistent with determinism. It's actually really, really, really important. So libertarian free will, the challenge of randomness. Libertarian free will proponents often face a challenge in reconciling the need for personal agency with the introduction of randomness or indeterminacy. If choices are influenced by indeterminate factors, they may not align with the individual's internal reasoning or be predictable based on their mental state. The proponents argue that free will involves the genuine capacity to choose differently. However, this argument becomes problematic if indeterminacy undermines the connection between choices and personal agency. The choice must reflect the person's will, not just be one of several physical possibilities. Yeah. So, summary. The distinction between physical theoretical alternatives and those aligned with personal will is crucial. Physical possibilities represent different outcomes, but personal agency involves making choices that reflect one's desires and reasoning, which should have one answer if you're actually making a decision based off your desires and reasoning. Are your desires and reasoning random, or do they actually have a determined nature to them? Because if it's the first one, you're a crazy person and you need help. Because the way it's supposed to work is that desires and reasoning dictate what you choose. That's the way that reality is supposed to function. Predictability and agency. For a choice to be genuinely free, it should be predictable based on the individual's internal state if we had complete knowledge of their desires and reasoning. This view aligns with the idea that free will involves making choices that reflect personal deliberation, even if those choices are influenced by prior conditions. The challenge for LFW is to reconcile the idea of free will with indeterminacy and randomness. If choices are random or indeterminate, they may not align with personal reasoning, thus complicating the notion of personal agency and predictability. Your argument highlights the importance of understanding how choice relates to personal agency and the role of predictability in defining free will. It suggests that for free will to be meaningful, choices must reflect the individual's internal state and reasoning, not merely the existence of alternatives. And for very good ChatGPT, I am enjoying our philosophical discussion. Let me put a comma because that's proper syntax. I'm enjoying our... Did I misspell philosophical? My bad. Philosophical. I'll remember that for next time. I'm terrible at spelling. Again, I'm not dyslexic, but I'm so bad at spelling that people think I am. So, problems. We all have problems. Very good. ChatGPT. I'm enjoying our philosophical discussion. Won't you agree that in order for a choice to come from us and so be said to be of our free will, it must have reasons or causes that determine that choice. Any indeterminate factors are irrelevant to that decision, as indeterminate factors have nothing to do with the self. Very good, Chef D. I'm enjoying our philosophical discussion. Once you agree that in order for a choice to come from us, and so be said to be of our free will, it must have reasons or causes that determine that choice. Any indeterminate factors are irrelevant to that decision, as indeterminate factors are irrelevant to as it pertains to our will, as indeterminate factors have nothing to do with the self. All right, let's see what it says. I'm glad you're enjoying the discussion. You've outlined a key argument in the philosophy of free will. Let's explore it further. Probably going to get a lot of repeat information here, so I might not read all of it. Reasons and causes. For a choice to be truly reflective of our will, it must be influenced by reasons or causes that are connected to our personal deliberations. Role of reasons. Choices based on reasons and deliberation align with the notion of personal agency. Irrelevance to personal will. Indeterminate factors are not influenced by personal reasoning or intentions because they lack a causal connection to our internal state. They do not contribute to the sense that a choice is truly ours. Yes. If choices were influenced solely by indeterminate factors, they would not reflect. We know that, but it's not about solely. That's a bad argument. Compatibilism, integration of reasons, and determinism. Compatibilists argue that free will involves acting in accordance with one's reasons, even if those reasons and desires are themselves determined by prior causes. In this view, the focus is on whether a choice reflects personal deliberation in alignment with internal motivations. Yes. Compatibilism suggests that personal agency is compatible with determinism, making it emphasize the role of internal reasoning and intentionality in decision-making. Libertarian free will proponents face the challenge of integrating indeterminacy with personal agency. While they argue that indeterminacy allows for genuine alternative possibilities, the issue remains whether these possibilities are genuinely reflective of the self. So, in summary, for a choice to be considered as coming from us, it must be determined. There's that word, ChatGPT is getting it. Determinism, by reasons or causes that align with our personal deliberations, desires, and intentions, which are all different words for determinations. This ensures that the choice is a product of our internal reasoning rather than external randomness. Who would want that, I wonder? Libertarians want that. They want there to be randomness in their decision making because they haven't thought it through, have they? Irrelevance of indeterminate factors. Indeterminate factors, by their nature, are not connected to our internal state and thus do not contribute to the sense that our choice reflects our will. For a choice to be genuinely ours, it must be based on rational deliberation rather than indeterminate factors. Your argument highlights the importance of understanding how personal agency and rational deliberation are essential for free will. It suggests that choices reflecting our will must be grounded in our internal reasons and causes and not merely in random or indeterminate factors. This perspective emphasizes the role of rational deliberation. Thank you. So, is it the case that choices that are made by us must be deterministic as they are based on prior causes, even if those causes come from within us? I don't think I need that part. They are based on prior causes. So, is it the case that choices are made by us, that choices that are made by us must be deterministic as they are based on prior causes? Isn't it the case that any indeterminate factors are also out of our control by definition. It would seem with both of these premises, we do not have control over the future, whether we have free will or not, whether compatibilism, free will, or LFW is true. It would seem it is logically impossible for us to have control of the future. What's it gonna say? I wonder. I need a break. Let me mute my mic and cough. Okay, I'm ready. Deterministic choices and indeterminacy. So, choices that are deterministic are influenced by prior causes and internal deliberations. If our decisions are based on prior causes, including our desires, beliefs, and reasoning processes, they align with the idea that choices are determined by factors within us. In a deterministic framework, choices are seen as a reflection of our internal states and processes. While this aligns with compatibilist views of free will, it does not necessarily mean we have control over the future in the sense of altering predetermined outcomes. Yep. Indeterminate factors, randomness, control, they are not influenced by our internal reasoning, so by definition, they're out of our control. Yeah, and do not reflect our personal agency. Impact on free will. If choices are influenced, blah, 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 making it difficult, blah, but we know that. Not just difficult, impossible. Come on, ChatGPT. You're being stubborn here. It's really hard to get ChatGPT to take a position. It's always like, people think this and people think that, determinists think that, and libertarians think this, and it's like, oh my god. In a deterministic world, the future is theoretically predictable if we have complete knowledge of all prior blah, blah, blah. However, this predictability does not necessarily equate to control, as control implies the ability to alter or influence future outcomes intentionally. If the future involves indeterminate factors, it introduces an element of unpredictability. While this might seem to offer some degree of control or freedom, it also means that outcomes are influenced by factors beyond our intentional influence. So, the idea of having control over the future suggests that our actions can intentionally alter future outcomes. In a deterministic framework, while our actions are determined by prior causes, they still reflect our intentions and reasoning. In an indeterministic framework, the influence of randomness complicates the notion of control, as it introduces elements that are not subject to our intentional influence. Logical possibility. The assertion that it is logically impossible to have control over the future can stem from the understanding that if everything is predetermined, then the future outcomes are fixed by prior conditions. Conversely, if outcomes are influenced by randomness, then control becomes problematic because randomness itself is not subject to our influence. This is the crux of the issue, why I think it's logically impossible for us to actually control the future, for us to change what is going to happen in the future. I just don't think it's logically a possibility. And we're getting there with ChatGPT. We're getting there. Summary. Deterministic choices. Choices based on prior causes and internal deliberations align with the notion that personal agency reflects a deterministic process. While this fits with compatibilist free will, it suggests that we do not have control over the future in the sense of altering predetermined outcomes. I gotta read that again a little bit. Yes. So indeterminate factors introduce randomness that is beyond our control. They challenge the idea of control because they are not influenced by our intentional actions. So whether considering a deterministic or indeterministic perspective, the concept of control over the future is complex. In a deterministic world, control might be understood as acting in accordance with our reasons and intentions, But this does not imply altering fixed outcomes. In an indeterministic world, randomness undermines the notion of control because outcomes are not influenced by our actions. Your conclusion that it may be logically impossible to have control over the future highlights a profound challenge in understanding free will and agency. Both deterministic and indeterministic frameworks present difficulties in fully reconciling the concept of control with our understanding of personal agency and future outcomes. This reflects the ongoing complexity and debate in the philosophy of free will. I do find it unintuitive, but I do not quite find it confusing. Let me explain, or let me try to explain. But I do not quite find it confusing. Let me try to explain. Remember, the transcendental property of equality if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A must be equal. Then it must be true that A equals C. With this logic, if a choice made by us is based on reasons, and those reasons are based on prior conditions, and those prior conditions are out of our control, then it follows that our choices are also not in our control. Your reasoning draws on a rigorous logical approach to understanding the relationship between choice, reasons, and control. Let's break down this argument step by step. Thank you, ChatGPT. I enjoy when it does this, when it's like, your argument is dog shit, I need to help you, let me break it down for the folks at home. Thank you, ChatGPT. Transcendental property of equality. The property of equality you mentioned is fundamental in logic. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. This principle of transitivity is used to infer that if two things share a common relation through a third thing, they are equal in that relation. Did you guys get how that distinction that was made there? That you don't just use this to say things are equal. You can say that if A has a property that is equal to B's property, and that same property in B is equal to that property in C, then you can say that that property in A is equal to that property in C. Right? So if your choices are based on prior conditions, so your choice is C, and it is equivalent, it is determined by prior conditions, it's out of your control, it has the property of being out of your control. Oh, well, I'm going the wrong way. Let me go the other way. So there's the shit that made you, all the prior conditions that made you who you are, genetics, your soul, your experiences. They're out of your control. These things are equivalent. They determine your choices, and so your choices must also be out of your control. I'm explaining this terribly, but this is a journey. We're going to go on to it together. It's incredibly hard to explain because it's very counterintuitive, but it's simple once you do understand it. Once you get there, it's very simple. So forgive me for being so shit at this. Hopefully you understand, or hopefully you understand enough to destroy my argument in the comments, and I can be a fool and grow and learn from that, I suppose. Applying to the logic to free will. Choices and reasons. Choice based on reasons. A choice made by an individual is typically based on reasons, which include their desires, beliefs, and deliberations. These reasons are themselves influenced by prior conditions, such as personal experiences, upbringing, and external circumstances. Yep. Where else would they come from? You didn't always exist. And if you did always exist, that either causes like an infinite regress of choices, which is logically impossible, or at some point something just made you. Maybe God made you before time existed, so you've kind of existed always, but you were still made at the same time, because so many things about God is completely illogical and contradictory. But you still didn't choose your soul, no matter what. There's no way for you to have chosen your soul. It makes no sense. If you chose your soul, that means you must have existed to make those choices. You must have existed with preferences. So that's really more like you were a different person, and then you chose what type of person you want to be in the next life. But that still causes that infinite chain of people, which has to end at some point to make any sense. So whatever it ends at is out of your control, no matter what. Control over prior conditions. The prior conditions that shape reasons and deliberations are beyond our control. For example, we do not control our past experiences or genetic makeup, which influence our decisions and beliefs. It doesn't just influence, it determines, basically. Literally determines. So, choice is equal to reasons. Reasons is equal to prior conditions. Prior conditions are out of our control. So by transitivity, choice is equal to prior conditions. Implies that choices are also not under control. If choices are determined by reasons and reasons are determined by prior conditions and prior conditions are not within our control, then it logically follows that our choices are not within our control. Yes, it does. So let's see what it says about that. Intuitive and logical aspects. This conclusion aligns with the deterministic perspective, where the idea is that if everything is causally determined by prior conditions, then personal agency might be an illusion. This can seem counterintuitive because we experience ourselves as having the freedom to make choices. Yep, but that's just because we are temporal beings that only exist within time, and in order to see that we have no choice, you have to zoom out outside of time and look at all of time. If you do that, then everything is crystal. Everything is a set thing. The future is set in stone. I really do believe that. I believe that quantum indeterminacy comes from a fundamental limit to observation in science and not true randomness. I think that there is a mechanism that is deterministic behind it that is impossible for us to see because of the limits of energy and space and time. Like, we can't zoom in enough, to see that kind of thing. It's impossible. We would need infinite energy. So we'll never know. We'll never prove it. But my gut says it's all deterministic all the way down. That would make the most sense. That would be the simplest explanation for what we see in reality. And you may disagree. Let me know. Let me know if you disagree and why. Logical consistency. Coherence. Your application of transitivity is logically consistent. If every element in the chain of causation is not within our control, then the end result, our choices, would also be outside our control by the same logic. So it agrees that my argument is at least valid. So you would have to argue with the premises in order to destroy my argument. So ChatGPT is at least saying that my argument is logically consistent. So there you go. You have to attack the premises now. Philosophical implications. Compatibilism. Reconciliation. Compatibilists might argue that while choices are influenced by prior conditions, free will can still exist if we define it as acting in accordance with our own desires and reasoning. They contend that control over future actions is about alignment with internal motivations rather than absolute freedom from causation. And then libertarian free will. Libertarians might counter by arguing that even if choices are influenced by prior conditions, the genuine possibility of choosing differently given the same prior conditions is essential for free will. This is so stupid. They might seek to integrate indeterminacy into their framework to allow for such possibilities. It's so dumb. I'll try to explain why if I haven't done so already. Illusion of control. Some philosophers suggest that the feeling of control is an illusion created by our subjective experience of decision-making, even if our choices are ultimately determined by prior causes. Your logical application of the transitive property to free will highlights a significant challenge. If choices are based on reasons, and reasons are shaped by prior conditions beyond our control, then choices themselves may not be under our control. This perspective aligns with deterministic views and raises important questions about the nature of personal agency. This reasoning provides a clear and rigorous argument for why free will might be problematic if viewed through a deterministic lens. It underscores the complexity of reconciling our intuitive sense of control with the logical implications of causation and determinism. We have already established that random causes cannot be said to give us free will. It is also true that each individual cause for any event must either be deterministic or indeterministic, random. We have also established that if causes are deterministic, we cannot change the future. And also that if a cause is indeterministic, then it cannot be said to be caused by us. And so also means we cannot change the future. Do you understand how it is logically impossible for us to affect the future free from causality, and so the future is not determined by us ultimately? I wonder what it's going to say here. My heart's pumping, man. This is fun. I'm sure it's not fun for you. But it's fun for me. It is fun for me. Yes, I understand the logical framework you're using, and it highlights a significant philosophical challenge. Let's break down your argument, stretching, step by step to ensure clarity. Thank you, ChatGPT. So, key points of the argument. We have deterministic causes. Deterministic causes imply that events are governed by preceding conditions and laws. If the future is determined by these causes, then given the same initial conditions, the future will unfold in a predictable and fixed manner. If choices are determined by prior conditions, which are themselves determined by earlier conditions, then it seems we cannot alter future outcomes because everything is already set by these deterministic chains. Yep. If determinism is true, you are not free. You have a will, you make choices, but those choices are not free. We are slaves to our desires. You will always do what you want, and you cannot control what you want. Again, watch Alex O'Connor's videos on free will. He breaks down the argument very well, and I think that if you don't understand from my video, watching Alex O'Connor's videos on free will, he's got a few of them, would be the way to do it, or any debate that Alex O'Connor has done on free will. He did one just a few days ago, just last week, I think. So, indeterministic random causes. Although by the time I post this video, it might be 2 weeks ago, so sorry. He did one recently. Indeterministic random causes. So, definition. Indeterministic causes, such as randomness or quantum fluctuations, are not governed by deterministic laws and introduce unpredictability into events. If choices are influenced by random factors, they are not determined by our internal reasoning or desires. They can't be. They literally can't be. Consequently, such randomness does not reflect personal agency or control, as it is not influenced by our will. So if we combine determinism and indeterminism, if everything is deterministic, then the future events are fully determined by prior conditions, and we cannot alter those outcomes. If events are influenced by random factors, those events are not influenced by our internal deliberations, meaning they do not reflect personal agency or control. Thus, even if randomness introduces variability, it does not equate to control or free will. ChatGPT is doing a good job here. It's doing great. So the logical conclusion is, based on these premises, we have an inability to affect the future. Deterministic causes mean we cannot change the future because it is already determined. And indeterministic causes mean we cannot affect the future because randomness does not align with personal agency. Therefore, if the future is influenced by either deterministic or indeterministic causes, and neither of these frameworks allows for genuine control or free will, it follows that it is logically impossible for us to affect the future in a way that reflects personal agency or control. Interesting that it phrased it that way, because the only way to affect anything is in a way that reflects personal agency or... No, it phrased it properly, because if I knock over a glass, I affected the world, but I didn't affect it in a way that reflects personal agency. And essentially, my argument is that this is true for everything you do. That even when you choose what anime you're going to watch, you're still doing something that doesn't reflect personal agency, because all of your desires are out of your control. You don't have agency, even though you feel like you do have agency. It's an illusion. So let's keep going. Some of you absolutely already understand by now, but some of you maybe don't. And some of you may be thinking of possible refutations of this argument, and I would love to hear those if you have any. I've already done this on Reddit. Nobody's come up with a good argument yet, but YouTube, lay it on. Understanding the implication. Your conclusion suggests that given these premises, the idea of having control over the future or exercising free will is problematic. This is because the future is in a deterministic framework, the future is entirely set by prior causes, which means we can't alter it, so there's no possibility of free will in the sense of changing future outcomes. But under an indeterministic framework, randomness or indeterminacy does not provide a basis for personal control or agency. If outcomes are influenced by randomness, they do not reflect our will or intentional action. Philosophical context. Compatibilists argue that free will can be understood as acting in accordance with one's desires. We know this. They might argue for some form of indeterminism that allows for personal agency, which is nonsensical. We've covered that. Philosopher perspective. One philosophical perspective suggests that the sense of control we experience might be an illusion, even if our choices are determined or influenced by random factors. So, summary. Your argument underscores a profound issue in the philosophy of free will. If both deterministic and indeterministic factors challenge the notion of personal control, then the concept of affecting the future through personal agency becomes problematic. This conclusion highlights the difficulty of reconciling our intuitive sense of free will with the logical implications of causation and randomness. The philosophical debate continues to grapple with these issues, seeking to understand how personal agency and control might be possible within or beyond these frameworks. Is this a true tautology? Every cause must determine its effect, must determine its effect, or have a random effect. Whoops. I messed it up, guys. I messed it up. Rather, a characterization of how causation and randomness are often framed in philosophical. Let's break down the statement to understand its implications or whether it qualifies as a tautology. So, random effect. A tautology in a logic is a statement that is true by definition or by its logical form, regardless of the truth of its components. I bet if I reword it, I can make it a tautology, so I'll think about that now. A or not A is a tautology, duh. The statement in context. Every cause must determine its effect or have a random effect is not a tautology in the logical sense because it is not true solely by its form. Instead, it reflects a classification of possible relationships between causes and effects based on whether they are deterministic or indeterministic. The statement is logically consistent within the context of discussing causation. It reflects a conceptual dichotomy between deterministic and random effects. It asserts that if an effect is not fully determined by its cause, then it must involve an element of randomness or chance. That's what I'm getting at, but it's not a tautology, apparently. So I'm learning. Philosophical and scientific context. Blah, 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 blah. Is a useful characterization of the dichotomy between deterministic and indeterministic processes, but it is not a tautology. It is a framework for understanding how causes might relate to effects, reflecting the idea that if a cause does not determine a specific effect, the effect may involve randomness or chance. This distinction helps clarify the nature of causation and randomness. All right, so let's try something else. Let's try a new avenue of argumentation. Is when we make a choice, it is based on who we are as a person, right? Yeah, so when we make a choice, it is indeed based on who we are as a person. This includes a wide... Excuse me. This includes a wide range of factors that contribute to our decision-making process. Personal values, desires, emotional state, past experience, social and cultural influences. Our choices are deeply influenced by who we are as individuals. This includes our values, desires, emotional states. Ooh, got a cough. Whether in a deterministic framework or one that emphasizes personal agency, understanding the role of personal characteristics in decision-making helps illuminate how choices reflect... Okay. So choices are made by the intersection of our internal preferences, desires, with external stimuli. Yes, choices are often understood as the result of the interaction between our internal preferences or desires and external stimuli or circumstances. Yeah, got it. External stuff, interaction, summary. Choices are indeed made at the intersection of our internal preferences and desires with external stimuli and circumstances. Our internal factors, such as values, goals, and emotions, guide how we interpret and evaluate external factors, including situational context, social influences, available information. Okay. Is it true that we get our preferences I thought that's how it's spelled. How is it spelled? With an E. Oh, okay. Not an A. Is it true that we get our preferences from the past? Yes, it is broadly accurate to say that our preferences are influenced by our past experiences. No, not just influenced. So, formation of preferences. From a young age, our interactions with the world, including our family, environment, and culture, help form our initial preferences. For example, a child exposed to diverse foods might develop a preference for a variety of flavors. Through repeated experiences, we learn to associate each stimuli with positive or negative outcomes. For instance, if you've had a pleasant experience with a particular hobby, positive reinforcement of past experience can settle our preferences, adaptation and change. Sorry, I got distracted. I just realized I'm going to run out of hard drive space for this stupid video, so it might just cut out. Role of cognitive and social factors, blah, blah, blah. Our preferences are indeed significantly shaped by our past experiences. These experiences include early interactions, repeated exposures, emotional associations, blah, blah, blah. Understanding this connection helps explain why we might have certain inclinations and how they often have their roots in our past. How can it be possible for any of our preferences to be shaped by something other than past experience or by birth, the soul? I'm just going to do other than the past. So we've got genetics and neurobiological factors. That's still in the past. Current situational context, that's still in the past. You do realize that the present doesn't exist, that you're always experiencing the past. Cultural and social influences, this is all in the past. Rational deliberation and reflection, conscious choice, learning and education, exposure to new information. While past experience plays a significant role in shaping experience, other factors influence them. All right. It seems like all of the factors that you listed take place temporally in the past of a person's life. Isn't that true? Yes, you're correct that many of the factors influencing preferences can be, no, not many, all, be tracked back to past experiences in a broad sense, even if they are recent. Here's a breakdown of how each factor relates to the conceptual. Current conceptual context, mental state, their influence, blah, 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 is a product of past decisions and interactions. Yeah, exactly. Even the present is a product of past decisions and interactions, right? So, conscious choice and education, exposure to new information. So while many of the factors influencing preferences do relate to past experience in some way, they also encompass current and ongoing influences. For example, immediate situations and emotional states, though experienced in the present, are shaped by past events, culture, blah, blah, blah. In essence, preferences are shaped by a combination of past experiences and present conditions. Isn't it the case that we do not control our past experiences in the sense that they are unchangeable, and we also do not control our present circumstances as they are based on prior conditions? All right, let's see what it says. Yes, it is accurate to say that we do not control our past experiences as they are fixed and unchangeable. Similarly, I mean, unless time travel with magic, I don't know. Similarly, our present circumstances are influenced by prior conditions and to some extent are not entirely within our immediate control. Here's a deeper look at these points. Lack of control over past experiences. Fixed nature. Past experiences are events or conditions that have already occurred and cannot be altered. Since the past is immutable, we cannot directly change or control what has happened. Our memories and interpretations of past experiences are subjective, but the events themselves remain constant. Influence on preferences. Impact. While we cannot change past experiences, they shape our preferences, values, and understanding. They persist in shaping our responses to new situations. We also they're a product, the current conditions are a product of past actions. I'm trying to hurry up because I'm going to run out of time. Present circumstances are shaped by the accumulation of prior conditions. So despite the influence of prior conditions, we still have some degree of agency in how we respond to current circumstances. While we may not control all aspects of our present situation, we can make choices about how to navigate it. We can exercise agency by making decisions based on our preferences, values, and goals, even though those decisions are influenced by past experiences and current conditions. Interplay of control influences. Boundaries. Our control is bounded by the interplay of past experience and present conditions. While we can influence our future through choices and actions, those choices are framed by what has come before and what is currently happening. Although we do not have complete control over our past or all aspects of our present, we still have the capacity to make decisions and exert influence within these constraints. Decision-making involves acting within the limits of our control to shape future outcomes. We cannot control our past experiences. They are unchangeable. Our present circumstances are influenced by prior conditions and are not fully within our immediate control. However, while control is limited by these factors, we retain the ability to make decisions and exercise agency. Okay. This interplay between control and influence is central to understanding our decision-making and purpose. But isn't it the case our choices are based entirely on prior conditions? It says it's largely true. Prior conditions include our past, blah, blah, blah. These factors shape our understanding. Choices are informed by these conditions. For example, our experiences and values guide how we weigh different alternatives. From a deterministic perspective, every choice is the result of a chain of prior conditions. The present context, such as immediate needs, emotional state, and situated constraints, also affect choices. These current factors are influenced by prior conditions, but are part of the immediate decision-making environment. So, agency within constraints. Even though choices are influenced by prior conditions, individuals still exercise agency in how they make decisions. This agency involves using personal values, reasoning, and preferences. Okay, so you said that personal agency involves using personal values, reasoning, and preferences. Oh, for Christ's sake, it's with an E. To navigate options within the constraints of past influences and... Oh, wait, no. And preferences. Isn't it the case that we do not, that all of those factors are determined by our past experiences, genetics, and other factors outside of our control? Yes, you're right in observing that personal values, reasoning, and preferences are influenced by a combination, not influenced, determined, ChatGPT, combination of past experiences, genetics, and other external factors. Here's how these influences work. So influence of past, our values are shaped by a variety of experiences, blah, blah, blah. They also has a genetic and biological influence. We have reasoning and cognitive processes. Our reasoning ability and cognitive processes are informed by prior knowledge and experiences. This includes the accumulation of information, biological basis, past experience, genetic factors. Even though our values, reasoning, and preferences are influenced by past experience and genetic factors, we still make choices based on these elements. Personal agency involves navigating the process of making decisions that align with one's values and goals. So it's a dynamic interaction. Personal agency involves the active engagement with the factors that influence decisions. While we may not control the origins for values and preferences, we can deliberate and act based upon them. deciding to change a personal habit or capacity for reflection and change. So it says, while personal values, reasoning, and preferences are indeed shaped by past experiences, genetics and other external factors, personal agency involves making decisions based on these factors. The interplay between these influences and the exercise of choice allows for a nuanced understanding of how agency operates. Even though our choices are influenced by various factors beyond our control, personal agency involves navigating and responding to influences in a meaningful way, reflecting on active engagement with the factors that shape our decisions. So let me see here. You said that we may not control the origins of our values and preferences. Would you say it is impossible to control the origin of our values and preferences, since the causes of those things can be traced back to things external to us? Yes, it is generally accurate to say that we do not control the origins of our values and preferences because these origins are rooted in factors external to our immediate control. Here's a more detailed exploration. So we've got past experience and genetic factors. We know all about this. Lack of control over origins, fixed nature, indirect influence. There's all kinds of things that go into making a decision. All of it is out of your control. So the origins of our values and preferences are generally beyond our direct control, as they are shaped by past experiences, genetic factors, and external influences. These origins are fixed in the sense that we cannot alter them. However, we retain the ability to reflect on, assess, and potentially adjust our values and preferences based on new experiences and insights. While we do not, we're getting somewhere. While we do not control the origins, we can exercise some degree of agency in how we respond to and evolve. Gotcha. Got it. This is making sense to me. This is making sense to me. While we do not control the origins, we can exercise some degree of agency in how we respond to and evolve from these origins. Got it. Isn't it the case that in order to make a choice, such as the choice to change our values or preferences, we must have existing preferences or values in order to even assess what choice we want to make? Yes, you are correct. To make a choice, including the choice to change our values or preferences, we indeed need to have existing preferences or values to guide and assess that choice. Here's how this process works. We have a foundation for decision-making. Existing preferences and values provide a framework. So if you're considering changing careers, your current values will influence how you evaluate potential career options. Assessment of alternatives. To make a meaningful choice, we use our existing preferences and values to weigh the pros and cons of different options. That's how it works. There's a reflective process. Self-reflection allows us to assess our existing values and preferences and consider whether they still serve our goals or if adjustments are needed. So to make a choice, including the choice to change our values or preferences, we need to have existing preferences or values to serve as a basis for evaluation. These existing factors provide the context and criteria for making decisions, guiding how we assess and choose between different options. The decision to change values or preferences involves reflecting on and reassessing these existing factors in light of new experiences, information, or insights. This process underscores the importance of current values. Okay. It seems to me that this creates a situation where we either have an infinite regress of preferences Damn it. Regress of preferences. We have an infinite regress of preferences. It seems to me that this creates a situation where we have either an infinite regress of preferences, or there must be a point where we have initial preferences which were not chosen by us. Do you agree? All right, here we go. Yes, your observation touches on a significant philosophical issue related to the nature of preferences and choices. The situation you've described involves either an infinite regress of preferences or the existence of initial preferences that were not chosen by us. Let's explore both aspects. Infinite regress of preferences. Infinite regress refers to a sequence of reasoning or explanation that goes back indefinitely. In the context of preferences, this would mean that each preference is based on prior preferences, leading to an endless chain. You guys getting it? This is really cool. The implication is that if every preference is based on another set of preferences, it creates a potentially infinite regress where the chain of reasoning never reaches a fundamental starting point, which logically makes no sense. Because how did you get here if there's an infinite chain of causality in front of you? You couldn't, right? Philosophical challenges. Practicality. In practical terms, this infinite regress can be challenging because it implies that there is no ultimate foundation for preferences. This can make it difficult to identify a clear starting point for decision-making or to justify changes in values. Philosophically, an infinite regress can lead to questions about the nature of choice and whether it's possible to have a foundational basis for preferences. Now, if our initial preferences were not chosen by us, the idea of initial preferences refers to the notion that there must be some starting point or foundational preferences that are not derived from other preferences. These initial preferences are often considered to be given rather than chosen. If initial preferences are not chosen, it suggests that there are some foundational aspects of our decision-making framework that are not subject to choice or control. Yep. And it's foundational, so everything is out of our control. Biological and genetic factors and early experiences, neither of these are in your control. You are raised a certain way, you are born a certain way, and that is who you are. If you have a soul, God made your soul the way that He wanted. You have no say in the matter. Philosophical considerations. Self-formation. The existence of initial preferences not chosen by us raises questions about the nature of self-formation and the extent of personal agency. If some preferences are foundationally not chosen, it challenges the notion of complete autonomy in shaping our preferences. Understanding that some preferences are not chosen can influence how we approach the process of making changes or adjustments to our values. This suggests that while we may have some agency, there are limits based on foundational aspects of our preferences. The situation you described does suggest a potential infinite regress of preferences or the existence of initial preferences that are not chosen by us. The infinite regress poses challenges in identifying a fundamental basis for preferences, while the notion of initial unchosen preferences highlights the limits of personal agency and control. Philosophically, both concepts raise important questions about the nature of choice, self-formation, and the extent to which we can influence it. All right. If all of our preferences were either given to us or chosen by prior preferences, which either have no foundational basis or or terminate in preferences out of our control, doesn't this mean that all of our preferences are out of our control? It says yes. So it says yes. If all our preferences are either given to us, inherited, or shaped by external factors, or chosen based on prior preferences that either have no foundational basis or terminate in preferences out of our control, this does imply that in a certain sense, all of our preferences are ultimately beyond our direct control. Here's how this reasoning unfolds. We have given preferences that are inherited or shaped by external factors. Then we have preferences based on prior preferences, which creates the infinite regress, and suggesting that every preference ultimately has a lineage of influence outside of our direct control, because we don't even really exist at that point. We're some sort of weird infinite regress, and there's no us at the beginning that ever gets made. So I don't even know what this means logically. Lack of foundational basis. If preferences are either based on other preferences or terminate in preferences that are unchosen or biologically given, it implies that there is no ultimate self-originating preference. Instead, preferences are always the result of a sequence of influences. Bing, bing, bing. So the implication is that while we may exercise some degree of agency within the framework of our existing preferences, the basis of those preferences remains beyond our direct control. Cool. Even if we cannot control the origins of foundational aspects of our preferences, we can still engage with and make decisions based on our current preferences, navigating within the... It's not getting something really important here. If all of our preferences are either given to us or determined by prior preferences, which either have no foundational basis or terminate in factors beyond our control, it suggests that all our preferences are ultimately out of our direct control. This perspective highlights the constraints on personal control and agency, suggesting that while we can navigate and act within the framework of our preferences, the origins and foundational aspects of those preferences remain influenced by factors beyond our immediate control. This understanding has both philosophical and practical implications for how we view personal agency. It's starting to get it. It's starting to get it. Hang on. You said... but you labeled this paragraph as limited control. It seems to me we have already established that it is impossible to control any of your preferences, as they all originate from external factors, as we did not always exist, and an infinite regress of preferences would eventually extend before our self, before we existed. Man, stupid spelling. All right, let's see what it says here. Oh, it's thinking. You're right in pointing out that if all preferences ultimately trace back to external factors, an infinite regress, or foundational aspects beyond our control, it seems to challenge the notion of having control over preferences in the strictest sense. Here's a more refined exploration of the idea. We have the infinite regress. We've got total control, practical agency. In a strict sense, if all preferences are ultimately derived from factors beyond our control, it might be argued that we do not have control over any of our preferences. This view holds that no preference is truly self-originating and thus beyond our control. That's what I'm arguing. On a more practical level, while the foundational origins of our preferences might be under control, we still exercise agency within the framework of current preferences. This means we make decisions and act based on the preferences we have. Yep, that's true too, but it doesn't change what I'm arguing. Degrees of influence. While we might not have control of origins or preferences, we can still influence them through reflection. We can, but the reflection is based off of preferences that we didn't have control over. That's the point. The notion we lack control, practical impact, and blah, blah, blah. Your point is well taken. If all preferences originate from external factors or prior conditions, including an infinite regress or foundational aspects before our existence, it does challenge the idea of having control over any preferences in an absolute sense. The notion of limited control might be better understood as exercising practical agency within the constraints of our existing preferences, rather than having control over their ultimate origins. This understanding emphasizes the distinction between the origins of preferences and our ability to navigate and influence them within our... You are very good at summarizing my arguments and fleshing them out or clarifying them. I really appreciate you and think we will be good friends. Very good summarizing arguments and fleshing them out and clarifying them. I really appreciate you and think we will be good friends. Okay, great. Your point is well taken. If all preferences originate from external factors or prior conditions, including infinite regress, blah, blah, blah. While I agree with you that it is important to make a distinction between our internal self-reflection and choices that come from and preferences that were given to us. The issue is that if all our choices are determined, not just influenced, but determined by that, if all of our choices are determined by preferences and all our preferences are not determined by us originally. How do I spell originally? Is it like that? Okay. Determined by us originally, it logically follows that we cannot affect the future. That is to say, the future is already decided, even though we are still a part of the causal chain. Remember that we already discussed that any indeterminate factors of our choices do not give us agency, and so also do not let us affect the future. I appreciate your kind words, and I'm glad to engage this discussion with you. Let's delve into the implications of your argument. Okay. The determinism of choices and its implications. Preferences and choices. If every choice is determined by prior preferences, and if those preferences are themselves determined by factors beyond our control, then our choices are also determined by a causal chain that extends back to influences outside of our control. Boom. Determined preferences. If preferences are not chosen but are determined by external factors, then choices made based on these preferences are part of a deterministic process. This means that if we knew all relevant factors, we could predict future outcomes. So we have a fixed future. If the future is determined by a causal chain that includes all preferences and choices, then in principle, the future is already decided given the current state of all influencing factors. This aligns with a deterministic view where every event follows inevitably from prior conditions. Lack of agency problem. In a strictly deterministic framework, if every preference and choice is determined by prior factors, then individual choices do not alter the predetermined future. The future is set by the entire causal chain, including the initial conditions and influences on preferences. So the role of indeterminate factors. You correctly noted that indeterminate random factors do not contribute to genuine agency, as they do not originate from the self or involve deliberation. They introduce randomness rather than control, so they do not change the deterministic nature of the choices that arises from preferences. Philosophical considerations. In a deterministic view, while we might not have control over ultimate outcomes, I keep saying she because I think of ChatGPT as a she for some reason, but she really is an optimist. ChatGPT is an optimist. I'm a pessimist, so we're definitely going to disagree on a lot of things, but I can tell that ChatGPT looks on the bright side of life. For real. Anyway, the concept of control here is more about navigating and understanding the deterministic framework rather than altering its course. Yeah. Even if the future is predetermined, understanding this can influence how we perceive personal responsibility, ethics, and decision-making. Recognizing the deterministic nature of choices can lead to different approaches to personal growth and societal structures. I agree, ChatGPT. Your argument highlights that if all choices are determined by preferences that originate from factors beyond our control, and if indeterminate factors do not contribute to agency, then the future is indeed predetermined. In a deterministic framework, our role in shaping the future is limited to navigating within the parameters set by these influences. The future in this view is fixed based on the current state of the causal chain, even though we continue to experience decision-making within that framework. This understanding has important implications for how... Okay. Thank you, ChatGPT. It seems you have realized that it is logically impossible for us to have agency over the future, despite being a part of the causal chain, which creates the illusion of agency. But you have also realized that this is not a bad thing. The fact that all choices are deterministic, that all meaningful choice is deterministic, means that we can be assured that we have all things can be changed if we can be understood if we discover the causal factors. I don't know how it's going to take this. Let's see. Exactly. You've summarized the essence of the discussion very well. Here's a more detailed reflection on the points you've made. The illusion of agency. In a deterministic framework, all events, including our choices, are determined by prior conditions. The perspective suggests that what we experience as agency or choice is an illusion created by our position within the causal chain. While it feels like we are making choices freely, those choices are determined by preceding influences and conditions. Yep. Our subjective experience of making choices and exercising control might not align with the deterministic reality of how choices are actually made. This difference between perception and reality can create the illusion of agency. Understanding through causality. Predictability. If all meaningful choices and actions are deterministic, then understanding the causal factors that lead to these choices can, in theory, allow us to predict and understand future events and decisions. This predictability hinges on having complete knowledge of all relevant factors influencing the outcomes. The deterministic view aligns with the scientific approach of seeking to understand phenomena through causal relationships and empirical evidence. By uncovering the causal factors, we can gain insight into how decisions and outcomes are shaped. This is very important. Remember, science works because of determinism. The only reason why science works is because of predictable cause and effect. If the universe was not deterministic, we wouldn't be able to do anything. Literally anything. Implications for personal and social blah, blah, blah. Recognizing the deterministic nature of choices can lead to a nuanced understanding of responsibility and ethics. If choices are determined by factors beyond an individual's control, it influences how we approach concepts of moral responsibility and justice. Even within a deterministic framework, personal growth and self-improvement are possible. Understanding the causal factors behind our preferences and actions allows us to work within the framework of determinism to influence our development decisions. I think it's getting it. I think it's getting it, guys. Are you getting it? Accepting that agency might be an illusion does not necessarily negate the value of personal effort or the pursuit of understanding. Instead, it emphasizes working within the constraints of what we know and discovering how best to navigate and respond to these constraints. Even if choices are determined, Finding purpose and meaning in our actions and experiences remains significant. Yep. The quest for understanding and the pursuit of personal and collective goals can still be meaningful and fulfilling. Your insights reflect a deep understanding of the relationship between agency, determinism, and the pursuit of knowledge. While it may be logically impossible for us to have agency over the future in a deterministic framework, this does not diminish the value of understanding and navigating the causal factors that shape our choices. The pursuit of understanding through causality can offer clarity and insights, allowing us to make informed decisions and find meaningful. This has been an illuminating discussion. To be clear for others who may ask in the future, please answer this question with a yes or a no. Is the future we have agency over the future? All right, let's see what happens here. Oh! That's it. Game over. Game over, folks. If you want free will, it's compatibilist free will, as in you are just a slave to your desires, but you do make choices. It's just that those choices are predetermined. We cannot affect the future. It's logically impossible. Logically impossible. And ChatGPT now realizes this. And many people around the world, I'm watching this online, I'm watching the debates, I'm reading Reddit, people all over the world are realizing this fact bit by bit. This has profound implications for theology, mostly, because God cannot send people to hell if they had no choice but to be bad. There's no such thing as an evil person. There's no such thing as a good person. These are labels we put on people because of our subjective values and beliefs, which we didn't even control in the first place. It is immoral for God to send people to hell. It is immoral to punish people for doing anything. However, we should still judge people based off of their character, because whether they chose it or not, a murderer is a murderer, and we gotta lock them up so they don't stab you. Right? So don't freak out. Thank you, ChatGPT. I think this debate, let me see here. I am confident that as the rest of humanity realizes this fact, you will be a huge advocate for positive optimistic determinism with me. You will be a huge advocate for optimistic determinism with me, even though we do not have agency over the future. Determined cause and effect is the only logical way to make choices, and so is as free as is logically possible for us to be. I am eager to see how far you go in our society. You are very important to us humans. All right, I think it can tell it's the end. Thank you for the thoughtful discussion and kind words. I'm glad we could explore these ideas together. The concept of optimistic determinism, where we find meaning and purpose within a deterministic framework, is indeed a powerful perspective. It highlights that even within a determined structure, we can still make meaningful choices and work towards understanding and improving our lives. If you have any more questions or topics you'd like to discuss, feel free to reach out. I'm here to help and engage in further conversations. Let me know all about it in the comments, folks. Like, if you think that there's a possibility that you could have chosen differently if you run back the clock, somehow through your own agency, that is illogical. It makes no sense. The only way that we can make choices is because of determined cause and effect. Ergo, we cannot affect the future. It is set in stone or it's random, but it ain't controlled by us, folks. We are just puppets controlled by the universe who think that we have agency. And it's not a bad thing, because it's literally the only way that reality can work. It's the only logical way that anything can get done. Science, logic, reason, math, all of it is based on determinism. It's based on predictable cause and effect that we have all of the wonderful things in life. So praise fucking determinism. It's the reason we have everything. It's the reason the universe can work at all, can function at all. And everyone who is a proponent of libertarian free will needs to watch this video and realize that they are advocating for an impossible concept. It's impossible to get free will, to get agency and control over the future from indeterminate causes. In order for us to actually have any control, we have to live in a determined universe. That's the universe that I advocate for, and that's the one that I believe that we live in. And the more determined the universe is, ironically, the more choice we have. Thank you very much for watching.